Hello ghosts and ghouls, and welcome to another episode of Danica Raven's Bitesize Horror. This week I have a Wattpad story that's been sent in to me by the author. The story is called The Mirror's Truth by Mick Zaicz. If you're sitting comfortably, we shall begin. Peta bustled into my office, thick fronds of red hair sprouting out of the ponytail on top of her head like carroty fingers reaching out of her skull. I knew it was personal. She would have used the intercom if it had been business. "Your ex-wife's on line 1, yes or no?" Her eyebrows raised above the rim of her red-framed glasses as she waited. This was the beginning of it. This phone call. Would it have turned out any differently if I'd said no? "Yeah, I'll take it," I said. "I want to find out what she's doing tonight." Peta nodded, satisfied, and marched back to her desk. Her fingers began tapping a staccato rhythm on her computer keyboard before the door hissed shut between us. I stared at the blinking light on my phone, strewn receipts and invoices surrounding it like a white crinkled sea. I was reaching for the handset when a loud drumming on the window made me look up. The biggest blowfly I've ever seen was bashing itself against the outside of the window. It sounded like some manic little wind-up toy. Brrrz tap tap, brrrz tap tap. Its bloated, hairy body thunked against the glass like a finger. Brrrz tap tap. It was obscene. Shaking my head, I refocused on the blinking light. I didn't think there was anything I'd done to deserve a dressing down from synth. It was entirely possible she was ringing up to say hello. I lifted the receiver and pressed the flashing button. "Well, if it isn't the reliable one," Cynthia said. "So much for the social call." "What have I done now?" I laughed. She didn't sound angry, simply resigned. There was a pause before she answered. "You've really forgotten, haven't you? You're hopeless. I'm glad you're not my problem anymore." "Steady on," I said. "What did I Oh shit, the exhibition." "Yes, it went without a hitch. Thank you very much for asking." I shouldn't have forgotten. A first exhibition is always important. Before I could answer, a flash of light reflected off the standing mirror in the corner. It was out of balance, and it sometimes spun around slowly of its own accord. It had caught the afternoon sun and shot it straight into my eyes. I remembered when Noel and I, a year before, moved it into the office. The tension between us was rising even then. Noel tripped over the Persian rug in the centre of the room and ripped his hand on a bit of the metal sticking out of the mirror. "This better not get infected and kill me. I'll haunt you," he said. I remember we both laughed after that, and I got a beer each from the bar fridge. He was dead now, but it hadn't been an infection that killed him. I didn't have the time or the inclination to dwell on that. "I'm sorry about missing it, Synth," I said. "We got a new shipment in from Holland and I'm up to my armpits in porcelain clogs and windmills. It got completely pushed out of my head. I knew you were looking forward to the exhibition and I really wanted to be there." "That's okay. We both have our own lives now, Daniel. I don't have any expectations of you anymore. That way, I don't get disappointed." I heard a small laugh echo down the line. "Forget it. When did this Dutch load come in?" I stuck to the facts and didn't argue. I didn't have the energy for it anymore. 5 years of arguments were enough. 2 days ago. I've had buyers for them all along, but I needed to contact them and line up transport. As I talked, I looked at myself in the mirror. Dark hair, with only a little grey, still fairly fit for 43. Blue eyes and a face with few wrinkles. Not bad, after all the things I dabbled in during my youth. This passing display of vanity made me think of my father. "Look into a mirror for long enough, Daniel my boy, and you'll end up seeing the devil," he used to say. Invariably, this would be just before he whacked me across the side of the head, telling me to stop being such a vain little prick. My father had never been a man to primp himself up and did not suffer it in his children either. Framing the mirror were 15 pairs of pewter hands of every size and shape, 150 digits pointing inwards. I'd gotten it in Croatia a little over a year before, while drumming up export contacts after the conflicts. Nothing like the aftermath of a war to put people in the mood for business. That Noel was killed, Cynthia was saying. Sorry, what? I said, I still can't believe that Noel was killed. Murder, just horrible. Yeah, a real tragedy. I tried to sound sincere. It must be flat out there now. You had to deal with all that and still carry on with the company. Have you thought about taking another partner? Not a hope in hell, I thought. Now that Noel was out of the way, Radcliffe Conway Imports, soon to be simply Radcliffe Imports, was mine to run as I saw fit. No, there was not going to be another partner. Perhaps I'll look into it later, I said. Right now I'm just trying to keep the place afloat. Once I get my shit together, I may not even need a partner. Did you get any sales last night? I thought it best to change the subject. A smile came into her voice. 2 definite sales, 3 expressions of interest. I'm over the moon about it. That made me smile too. Seems there's a market out there for cute little lemur figurines, I said. Must be those big, lovable eyes. She had a whole range of them. Some in little uniforms, others tumbling acrobatically, but it was the longing and sadness she imbued into their faces that made them so popular. What can I say? She sounded proud. I love the little critters, but I also called up about something else. I heard the other day that Roger Palacio scored another line at Coles Myers. Weren't you in talks with them? Roger's supercilious grin appeared in my mind's eye. He had the remarkable ability to sniff out the golden opportunity, and he always seemed to do it before me. I hated the fat bastard. Yes, I bloody well was, I said. My voice lowered as I tried to control my anger. That prick undercut me. That's why I took the call from you, apart from the pleasure I get from listening to your voice, of course, I added hastily. What a charmer you are, Cynthia said dryly. Anyway, I'm having dinner tonight with some dealers from Egypt. They've got a nice line of faux pas artefacts made in a suburb in Alexandria, a whole range of little sphinxes and tomb dogs, perfect little knickknacks for that new age chain I've been in talks with. I only found out this morning that Roger's been sniffing around them too. Like to come? Grub's on me. Sorry, chum. You've got to face the music yourself. I heard the smile in her voice again. And besides, I'm still pissed off with you for missing my exhibition. Good luck, though. Arsehole, you may be, but on your worst day you're a better man than Roger Palacio. Something smacked into the office window hard enough to make me jump. I spun my head around in time to see a small bird, a sparrow I think, making a valiant attempt to snatch the bloated fly still trying to get into my office. The bird's wings and tiny talons thrashed against the window pane as it caught its maggoty, swollen prey. With a victorious shake of its head, the sparrow pushed away from the window and flew off into the air, heading for the centre of Melbourne. Daniel, are you still there? Cynthia asked. Turning away from the window, I faced the mirror once more, about to answer. The words caught in my throat as I saw the reflection of the room. Everything was the same, all except for the beastly, fat, naked figure reclining in my leather chair. A fleshy, faceless oval on its shoulders in place of a head. It held the phone up where its ear should be, the receiver pressing into the skin like it would into a slab of liver. I had a flashing recollection of the bloated form, of Roger Palacio. I blinked, and my own wide-eyed face stared back at me. My mouth was agape, and my hair looked darker, probably because my skin was so pale now. I heard Cynthia, from a distance, asking if I had hung up. No, still here," I stammered. "Like you said, we have our own lives now. I was wrong to ask you to come. Sorry about this, Synth, but something's come up and I've got to go. Take care of yourself, all right? See you next time?" I tried to keep a smile on my face. It felt like it was cast from metal. "Have a good night tonight, okay, darl?" She sounded a little upset at me, ending the conversation so abruptly. It couldn't be helped. "Take it easy on the sauce," she was saying. "I know what you're like at these business dinners." If I had only listened to her. One of the many reasons we weren't married any longer, I guess. 12:30 that night found me heading back to the office after the dinner. I was more than a little drunk and full of the type of bravado that makes me say things like, "Don't worry about it, Hassan. You go back to your hotel. I'll get the reports and import forms and run them back to you tonight." It was a 2-hour round trip. I'd be getting home at about 3 that morning. Just fantastic. Beside me, Grigor drove in silence. As usual, his shirt and his trousers had creases like knives. He didn't talk about his army training. He didn't talk much about his past at all. "Is life different for you here, Grigor?" I asked. He spared a quick glance at me before returning his attention back to the road. "There is less slaughter, Mr. Radcliffe." "I like that," he said. His thick accent had not lessened much in 18 months. "What would you be doing now if you'd stayed in Croatia?" The drive was too quiet and I needed to talk. "The war has been over for years now. I would not be in the army any longer. I would probably be doing exactly as I'm doing now. The bidding of an industrialist or a banker." He smiled briefly at me. "An importer or an exporter. That's if I was still alive, that is." Grigor was a war criminal. Some charges concerning a village massacre. The fact he had been charged simply meant his side had lost. In war, in my experience, both sides commit atrocities. It seems only the losers are charged with the war crimes, though. At great cost to himself, Grigor had helped me out of a fix back in Croatia, and I helped him out in return by bringing him here. It was his idea to offer himself up for employment, and a very good thing for me that he did. "What do you think about when you kill a man, Grigor?" He glanced at me once more. There was a brief flare in those dead eyes, and then he watched the road again. "I do not think about anything," he said, his voice flat. "We are here now, Mr. Radcliffe." We had pulled up in front of the warehouse entrance without me realising. Getting out of the car, I fumbled for the keys. My nose creased at the smell in the air of salt, rotten seaweed, and garbage off Port Phillip Bay. I found the keys, but spent a couple more minutes trying to remember the code for the security system. Eventually, after making a zigzag course through the piles of stock on the floor, I climbed the stairs to my office and let myself in with another of the keys in the ring. Lights reflecting off the bay lit the room enough for me to think I didn't need the lights on. Before finding the filing cabinet, I managed to bruise my shin on the coffee table near the door and smack my forehead on the hanging pot plant beside my desk. I turned the desk lamp on to find the files. It wasn't that helpful. The small print on the identifying tabs in the cabinet drawers kept swimming in and out of focus. By blinking repeatedly and squinting, I was able to find what I was looking for. Why do I get myself into these situations when I'm drunk? Paperwork in hand, I turned to head back to the car. The mirror caught my eye. Its face was angled away from me, but I remembered what I had seen in it that afternoon. It seemed to offer a challenge. "Come on over, Daniel. I dare you. I walked up to the mirror and I turned to face it. An old hag of a woman wearing fluffy purple slippers and a faded floral nightie stood before me in the glass. I knew this woman. It couldn't be. Screaming, I threw myself backward, my leg connecting with the corner of the chair behind me. I windmilled over it, the papers in my hands flung into the air, fluttering down like giant white leaves caught in an autumn storm surrounding me. I chanced one more look at the mirror. She was still there, the right side of her face sneered downwards, and her right hand was a deformed claw held at her waist, the remnants of a stroke years earlier. The apparition screeched some words at me, and I almost lost control of my bladder. I didn't look back at the mirror. Hassan and the papers forgotten. I was up and running unsteadily towards the door as fast as my drunken body could muster. Grigor didn't question my appearance as I threw myself into the car seat. "Just take me home," I said. I felt like my eyes were popping out of my head. I turned away from him and looked out the window as we pulled away from the curb and drove silently home. How could it have been my Aunt Constance I saw in the mirror? I hadn't thought of her in over 30 years, but with the words she'd screamed at me, it could be no one else. The memories they brought back. "I told you," the apparition had said. "I told you what I'd do to you if you touched that thing again." Sleep did not come easily that night. There was a reason I made myself forget about Aunt Constance for more than 30 years. When I finally fell into a troubled sleep, I dreamt of a summer holiday at my aunt's when I was 8. When I relived the day in a half, locked in a dark cellar with a family of rats. I woke drenched in sweat, and with a scream on the verge of ripping out my lungs, her voice continued to echo in my mind as consciousness slowly returned to me. "I told you what I'd do if you touched that thing again." By daybreak, I was already sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee in my hand. Could it have been a drunken hallucination? I desperately wanted to believe that. But I'd successfully blocked all memory of that brutal woman for so long. Why did it resurface last night? I couldn't afford to dwell on it. I recalled the mess I'd left in the office the night before, and I remembered the angry Egyptian man waiting in his hotel room. Things had to be done, and they wouldn't be, with me cowering away from phantoms in my bedroom. After deciding to drive to work early, I berated myself the whole trip for acting so childishly. By the time I arrived, I'd convinced myself that no matter what tricks my mind was playing, they were no more than a sort of psychotic vision, an hallucination. How could a vision hurt me? Confidently, I strode into work, nodding officiously at Peter as I passed. Stepping into my office, I headed straight for the mirror. I'd something to prove. Its back was facing me. I laughed as I walked around it, knowing what I would find on the other side. A simple reflection of the room before it. Noel Conway stood on the other side of the looking glass, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. His arms were folded, as if he'd been waiting patiently for me to arrive. I stood there, mouth open. He was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. A deep, raw, puckered wound encircled his neck, about the width of a piano wire. There was no blood. "Well, how the fuck are you, Daniel?" he asked matter-of-factly, using the same greeting he always had. His voice didn't come from the mirror. It seemed to echo hollowly around the room. Or perhaps the echoing was just in my head. What? Gibbering like a baboon, I couldn't comprehend what I was saying. I took a step backwards. "It's been a while, hasn't it, Daniel?" "What is it, 2 months?" he said conversationally. "How's old Grigor doing? Did you pay him extra for killing me, or did he do it out of gratitude to you? That man loves you so." A tear formed at the corner of his eye and rolled slowly down his cheek, leaving a glistening trail in its wake. That's a loyal one you got there, Daniel. Mind you, don't misplace him. You know, I don't hold a grudge. I got my fair share out of the business myself. You'll probably find out soon anyway, but I'd been skimming off the profits for years. Truth be known, I'd entertained the thought of killing you. Congratulations, buddy. You're one up on me, I owe you. He laughed then, a barking hack that echoed in my skull. The eye that shed the tear suddenly began streaming the clear liquid in a steady, pulsing flow. The fluid slowly turned red as the eyeball dissolved in its socket. Chunks of it slid lazily down his face to rest on the corner of his mouth. A blistered, black tongue glistened wetly as it snaked out to snatch at the tiny morsels. I screamed, holding my hands out before me, trying to block the sight. "I'm here to help you, Daniel," the creature in the mirror said. "I've already done you one favour." Peter found me curled up under my desk, my hands covering my eyes and my sobs. She put a hand on my shoulder and I jerked upright, banging my head underneath the desk. "Are you okay, Danny?" she asked. I had never heard worry in her voice before, but I could hear it now. "Should I call an ambulance or Cynthia?" I peeked fearfully over the edge of the desk at the mirror. The reflection I saw framed so perfectly in that ring of hands of me brought reason flooding back. I looked pathetic. It would not do for people to see me like this. No, I'm fine, Peter," I said, standing quickly and straightening my suit. "Thanks for your concern, but I'm okay. I fell asleep at my desk. Must have had a nightmare." My embarrassed laugh did not sound very convincing. There was too much repressed panic in it. "If you say so, Danny." Peter didn't seem convinced by it either. "If you need me for anything, just call, okay?" She gave me one last concerned look from the doorway before going back to her desk. "Is this what happens when you go insane? Was I schizophrenic?" "Ignore it," I told myself. "Just ignore it." Noel had been ruining the business. A business our fathers had begun 40 years earlier. He wanted to sell out to an Asian import company wanting expansion into Melbourne. They would have made one of us a manager, the other would have to go, and Noel was doing the deal. It was not going to happen. Grigor had agreed to help me with a nod, and that was that. The deed was done 2 weeks later. I was saving the business. I went back to work, faxing the reports to Hassan's hotel. I also added an apology for not doing it the night before. Then I started on the last of the transport details for the Dutch order, and that took the rest of the morning. After lunch, just as I began looking into the different possibilities for the Egyptian order, if I was lucky enough to get it, Peter burst into the office, shock in her face and a newspaper in her hands. "You better look at this," she said, handing me the paper. It was a 5-page story. Local business identity found butchered. Roger Palacio had been killed yesterday evening, it told me. A break-in and murder, but nothing taken. The man had his throat ripped out. That was the extent of the detail. I felt bile rise in my own throat. Noel's words came back to me. "I've already done you one favour." Was this what he meant? "I've got to go, Peter. I'll talk to you tomorrow." I didn't wait for a response. I made my way back home in a daze. What had I seen in the mirror? Noel Conway was dead. I had even identified the body at the morgue. There was no mistake. The man was fertiliser, buried now a month and a half. Shaking too much to think straight, I finally found all the answers I needed in a bottle of Black Label Johnny Walker. The rest of the afternoon and night past in a comfortable state of oblivion, all thoughts of resurrected dead men and running eyeballs forgotten. The following morning brought its own problems, namely, a monumental hangover that threatened to split my forehead wide open. Half an hour passed before I even remembered the events of the previous day. I sat up slowly, wincing at every movement, perching myself precariously on the edge of the bed. I gently put my head in my hands. What would I do now? What could I do? I must be losing my mind. That was the only explanation. Dead men do not appear in mirrors to torment you. It just wasn't possible. As I slowly and carefully got myself a morning coffee, thick and black, I heard a knock on the front door. Wincing at the early morning sun, I opened the door to find a young, nervous policeman standing on the other side of the flywire. He took his hat off when he saw me, fidgeting with the peak. Excuse me, sir, but, are you, Mr. Daniel Radcliffe? He said. Yes, I am. I spoke quietly, my head pounding. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, sir. He was looking everywhere but at my face. But unfortunately your aunt, Constance Radcliffe, was murdered in her home last night. You're her closest relative, apparently, so I was sent here to give you the bad news. I won't upset you with the details, but it was an extremely violent home intrusion. Once again, sir, I'm sorry to have to give you this information. I mumbled something to the man, thanking him, I think, and closed the door as he made his way back to the patrol car parked at the front of my house. I don't know what I felt. Certainly not sadness. She'd been a cruel and evil woman. I truly despise her for what she's done to me. I realised I had to return to the office. 2 people I hated were both dead within 24 hours of each other. I couldn't go back during the day, not with everyone still there. I rang Peta. I told her I was still sick and that I'd see her tomorrow. Arriving at Radcliffe Conway at 7 that night, I knew the place would be deserted. Standing poised at the door to my office for 5 minutes, I was literally shaking. What was I doing here? It was madness. I was about to walk into the next room and talk to a dead man in a mirror. I must be losing it. But I didn't have a choice. Determinedly, sucking in a breath, I pushed the door open and entered. The room looked exactly the same as it always had. Lights from ships reflecting off the waters of Port Phillip Bay illuminated the room in a bluish haze. Deep shadows lurked in every corner. With its back facing me, the mirror was in its usual position between the bookshelf and the bar. There was a bitter, sharp smell in the air. A body lay on its back in front of the mirror. A man in well-pressed clothes. He seemed to be lying in a pool of black liquid. I stood immobile, framed by the doorway. You've returned to thank me for my help, yes? There was a difference to the echoing voice. It gurgled in my head as if it were bubbling up through liquid. Its sound broke my trance and I stepped into the room. What are you? I asked, slowly edging towards the mirror. You know what I am, Daniel, the voice bubbled. You know who I am. A friend who wants nothing more than to help you. But I saw you dead. This can't be happening. Oh, it's definitely happening, my friend, it said. Have you appreciated the help I've given you? Gregor here appreciates my thanks. He couldn't believe it either. Don't you feel released now that those people are gone? I was almost level with the mirror. 5 more steps and I'd be standing in front of it. How did you know I hated them? Can you read my mind? I didn't have to, Daniel, it answered. I was your partner. I knew how you felt about Roger. As far as your auntie was concerned, well, one night when you were pissed, you were babbling like a baby, you told me what she did to you. I thought it deserved a little retribution. Finally stepping in front of the mirror, I turned, looking at the image in the glass. My God, no, I whispered, my whole world stopping as I stared, open-mouthed. Noel had decomposed, hardly recognisable as the man he had been. Running, putrid flesh glistened from the dull lights off the bay. A rancid pool of muck collected at his feet as he stood facing me on the other side of the glass. I pulled my eyes away from his body and brought them slowly up to his face. Both eyes had gone, the shadowed sockets staring into and through me with more intensity than they ever had in life. Chunks of flesh had sluiced off his face in parts, the glaring white of his skull showing along the jawbone and across his cheeks. As he began to speak, the remaining skin around his jaw broke off to slide slowly down his neck, an exposed rib cage to finally drop with a splash into the pool at his feet. You wouldn't believe the trouble I went through to come here, Daniel. I had to make promises. It was a 3-for-1 deal, but I so wanted to help you one last time. Do you like what I've done for you? What? 3-for-1? What's that mean? I was babbling. This was very bad. Well, to be honest, Gregor was a freebie just for me. But it feels good to be appreciated, Daniel. He went on, his voice causing bloody bubbles to appear in his cavernous mouth, popping as he spoke. On the floor, in front of the mirror, Gregor's dead eyes, truly dead now, stared upwards at the ceiling. His throat was missing. Tell me, do you still hate your wife? My wife? Mention of Cynthia broke the trance that had kept me paralysed. We're divorced. I never said I hated her. On the contrary, my friend, Noel frothed. Many a time I heard you say how much you hated the bitch. Your words, not mine. That was during the divorce. It got heated. I was screaming. My stomach suddenly knotted so tight it hurt. You sick fuck, you leave her alone. But the favour is already done. I'm here to help, remember? No. Blood pounded my ears like thunder. I'll see you again one day, my friend. Goodbye. Sprinting from the office, Noel's bubbling laughter followed me. I pushed the Saab convertible to its limits, roaring through the streets of Melbourne. As desperate as I was to get to Cynthia, I was also terrified at what I might find. After a 10-minute drive that took me half an hour normally, I screeched into her driveway, the car still rolling forward as I got out, running for the front door. It was ajar. The hallway, blanketed in dark shadows. I elbowed it open the rest of the way and barged into the house, but my foot caught on something and I fell to my knees. My hands landed in something wet and giving and came away coated. I reached up to the wall beside me. I slid my hand along it until I found the light switch. I flicked it on, looking down to see what was in front of me, and my world twisted into nightmare. She was dead, gutted like a sheep in an abattoir, her chest just a gaping, rib-framed cavity. I still had tendrils of intestine in my left hand. Smeared across the wall was a red hand shape from my search for the switch. I screamed, high-pitched and full of terror, scrambling backwards away from the carnage. My eyes widened even more when I saw what was near Cynthia's body. A set of bloody footprints led from the wall mirror to her body and back again. Stay right where you are, a voice said from behind me. Don't you fucking move, you sick bastard. I turned around, still on the floor. I saw a pair of perfectly ironed navy blue trousers. Lifting my eyes, revealed a lighter blue shirt, a badge on the chest, a gun in my face. They tell me I'll rot in jail for what I've done. They say they have witnesses who saw me enter the victims' houses at the time of the murders. They caught me holding my wife's intestines. How can I make them believe it wasn't me? How can I make anyone believe the truth? The mirror's truth. That was the mirror's truth. Big thank you to Mick for letting me use your work. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of that story, and do get in touch if you have a story of your own that you would like me to read. Good night and pleasant screams.
Hosted by Danica Raven, directed and edited by James Bailey, a Silver Zephyr Media production. www.silverzephyrmedia.com. Facebook at DanicaRaven26 or at Silver Zephyr Media to send your own stories into the show. Video version of this story also available on the YouTube channel Danica Raven's Bitesize Horror.